Well, hello, my lodge buddies. I hope that this picture is coming through now. I'm doing my best to decipher what I'm seeing here on the screen. Uh, Sweetie, are you dialed in?
I am.
Okay. So I'm Jeff Curtis, and I would like to formally greet you folks. It's nice to be here. This is my first time to be with you in 2022. And, there's some things to say about that. Uh, Here we are together. It's been a rough couple of years. 2021 was quite a thing. We're still sort of coming out of, I think, kind of a hard time for the human family here on Earth. It's been a little rough, and so tonight I'm going to spend a little while talking about that and some of the consequences of it. The general format of these talks that I've been giving has been to delve into a particular sort of a scientific interest and hobby, and a spiritual mission as well, understanding and studying the nature of human consciousness. Uh, but also along the way, I've tried to spend a little while talking about uh, general news in science and or some of the larger issues facing humanity, and I try to come up with some updates and some observations, maybe pieces of good news and things to feel encouraged about. Um, and maybe we could put those under the category of public service announcements or something. Um, Tonight I'm going to try to do a little bit of that. So when we look at the general state of the globe and humanity and what we're grappling with right now, it's easy to identify the difficulties of now 2 years of a pretty troublesome pandemic that have had really very difficult consequences for a lot of people, up to and including death. We continue to face a fairly significant challenge to our global family arising because of climate change, and some of the family knowing that, caring about it, being awake to it, wanting to do what we can. Other parts not so much. They just want to keep making profits. There's a wonderful movie out now you may have heard of on Netflix called Don't Look Up. If you haven't seen that movie yet, I highly recommend dial into that movie. It's quite funny. Don't Look Up is the name of it. But it's more than just funny. It's also very poignant. Uh, we have ongoing difficulties, for sure, in the United States with an unhappy degree of political division and anxiety over where things are going with the trajectory and fate of our experiment in democracy, and how's that going to work out. There's been enough going on to keep people challenged, and so that has resulted in or exacerbated perhaps a pretty widespread problem. You might call it a crisis or an emergency in public mental health in America and around the globe. So by any epidemiological measures, what we discover is that anxiety and depression across all age groups, but increasing particularly rapidly in the young, is concerning. And we've all been touched by it. I think we're all aware of it. We've felt it in ourselves. We may have seen it in our friends and loved ones. Excuse me while I kind of fool around here trying to get as comfortable as I can get. Um, and it's a thing. It's a moment to stop and reflect, feel some compassion and some fellowship, and also realize that amongst the challenges, the meltdowns, breakdowns, crises, there's progress. There are breakthroughs, and it's kind of comforting to realize that in the midst of all the difficulties, science is on the job. There are people inventing things, coming up with coping strategies, coping skills, finding ways to move forward, finding ways to prop up the public health. I believe it was in one of the last couple of times that I was with you folks on one of these events. I spent a little while talking about some of the breakthroughs in climate change remediation. So, despite all the difficulties we face, the portent of climate change, there's more people than you realize working on how to measure this problem, how to both observe the problem and project it and be able to get ahead of it at a knowledge point of view, as well as new breakthroughs and programs in renewable energy, fusion energy research, which there seems like every 3 months there's another announcement lately about a bit of measurable progress towards fusion energy, which would really be welcome at this point in time. There's also been a lot of progress towards what we call geoengineering or remediation. Remediation would mean ways in which to help to undo some of the damage that has transpired because of the buildup of CO2 and ocean acidification. I'll cycle back to specifics in that area in some subsequent episode and maybe try to get a little bit more into the details there, because it's worth knowing about that, both to keep an eye on it, to make sure it all sounds at least sane, and also to be a little bit encouraged by it and realize that there's pushback. The human race has still some cards to play and some new measures to try in terms of adapting. But what I wanted to address tonight is more along the lines of some general good news and things worth knowing about in the progress to try to strengthen global public mental health and the mental health of people that might be friends, neighbors, family members, or yourself, or however the case may be. So, as a result of things I've been talking about, we have this issue of a lot of people experiencing more anxiety and depression than what might have been the case just even 10 or 20 years ago. Well, what would be some of the points of progress? Let me bring a couple of them out for you here. It's kind of worth hearing about and fun, and it's a nice way to showcase scientific progress. I'll start here by showing you. So I just do this. It's my habit, right? As a long-term educator, science guy, and book nerd, I'm always collecting all these magazines, and then I make notes all over them and keep the ones that I think will be useful and interesting, particularly to share with you in these talks. This is from October of 2021, and I was quite inspired to read this article that, there we go, is about a new technology. It springboards off of some technology from about 2015 that I think I might have even mentioned in a lodged talk at the time. I'll cycle back to it in a minute, but what I want to talk about now is the current technology that this article is based on. So there are many people who are not particularly helped by currently available generations of psychiatric medications. Now, many people are. I'm not one to downplay or throw shade on psych meds. They can be transformative. They have saved many, many lives. They have enabled many, many lives. And I'll be coming back to an example of that to talk about here in a minute. But they're not perfect. We don't know the mechanism of action of many of the modern psych meds. So the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor class of molecules, we know some things about how they work, the way they modulate neurotransmitter levels, the way they, over time, begin to change neuroreceptor cell densities or receptor densities on cells, on neurons. But it's an imperfect science, and it definitely doesn't work for everybody. And so there's a real need for other approaches. Well, one of the approaches that is really taking off at this point is the approach wherein we've learned now how to put small networks of electrodes, very, very fine wires. Don't even think of them as needles. These are wires that are about the same diameter as a human hair, but stiffer, so that they can be implanted down into the brain. The particular breakthrough being talked about in this article involves an exceedingly clever arrangement where what they do is they put a small network of sensing wires into brain regions called the amygdala. The amygdala is you have one on each side. It's a little kind of a walnut-sized thing that's part of the limbic system. That's sometimes called the fight or flight response network in the brain. And folks with chronic or long-lasting anxiety, they tend to have high levels of electrical activity and over excitation taking place in that matrix of cells that makes up the amygdala. Well, this new breakthrough involves a method whereby that is monitored in real time. You put in these very fine wires, send out the signal to a computer that monitors when electrical activity reaches a threshold, and then a very mild, tiny little bit of current is run through another network of cells that has been implanted into a brain region called the ventral striatum. It's a different structure in the brain that is, I think there's one on each side. It's just called the VC. It's also called the ventral capsule / ventral striatum. And to that particular brain region is delivered low current, low voltage, relatively high frequency, what's called gamma brainwave band, around 40 hertz, 40 to 50 hertz current. I don't know how they figured this out. It would be interesting to go deep into the full literature and see how many things did they try. But anyway, what they now know is that if they put a little buzz of current into the ventral striatum, it de-excites and normalizes the degree of electrical activity in the amygdala, and people's depression and anxiety lift. Now, they haven't done this on a whole lot of people yet. This is a relatively new technology. Let me read for you what one of the first patients had to say after she was subjected to this treatment to help her deal with otherwise refractory, meaning non-drug responsive, non-electroconvulsive therapy responsive. Nothing was working for her, so she tried this. And her description was, I felt the most joyous sensation. My depression became a distant memory. And life went on as it had in the past. And so she was restored. She was restored to her pre-depression, pre-anxiety, disabling condition by this very clever technique. Now, the way this thing works is that the monitoring module is always looking for and on the alert for this cascade of electrical activity in the amygdala structures, and then it just delivers a few tenths of a second of therapy to the ventral striatum, and then it just turns off and it just waits. So in this one particular instance, they found that in this woman it would turn on a couple hundred times a day over the course of a day, and that meant that it was not on most of the time. It was just on a little while. What's so wonderful about an approach like this is that the electrodes are very fine. They're not doing any physical damage inside the person's brain. And they're not on all the time, which means that there's not going to be a degradation issue in terms of the response of the surrounding tissue to the electrodes themselves. This treatment I'm talking about here that is so elegant and so smart is the 2021 version of an approach that was called deep brain stimulation, and I'm pretty sure I talked about this once before in a lodge meeting. This came out of this episode of Scientific American. I'm not going to talk about the Neanderthal mind, although that might be kind of a fun topic for later. But what was talked about was the early version of deep brain stimulation. Now take a look at this picture. This is the methodology by which they would put a few much larger electrodes very deep into the brain, into central regions, leave them on all the time, and alleviate refractory depression in people who were otherwise disabled by it. Now that's pretty harsh. Worked. I know from subsequent reports that I read was that sometimes it had to be refreshed because it was just a much cruder technology relative to what we have now. And 2015 seemed pretty advanced at the time. We didn't think of our technology as crude in 2015, and yet compared to what we have now, it was. And I would point out that this amazing technology here, talked about in 2021 with networks of fine wires that only turn on for a few milliseconds at a time as needed during the day, that does still involve a couple of operations through small openings where they're going to put in the sensing electrodes and then thread in the treating electrodes. And that's never a trivial deal when you penetrate the skull, although this is approaching an outpatient, pretty quickie thing to do to people if they need it, in fact. However, just in the few weeks since I read this, I've already become aware of the next superseding level of technological approach to treating refractory depression, which is now to use electromagnetic pulses from outside the skull, so nothing invasive. It turns out you can put a magnetic coil, or essentially an electromagnet, which is a bunch of wires wrapped in a coil that you put electricity through there, and it creates a magnetic field. And you can dose exactly the right area of brain that a person, in this case, is under-responsive. So there's different ways to image and understand the brain having gone out of whack. One of them is to look for places that are too active, and the other one is to look for places that are not active enough. So this next treatment modality, non-invasive, just involves using magnetic fields in pulses from outside the skull, and this is showing great effects in people. They take a few treatments in order for it to work, and this is called TCMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation. I don't have an article to show you about it. This is something I learned about in a YouTube video, and I will no doubt be hearing about it and have it on board one of the very next times that I'm here with you guys to talk, because it's going to take off like hotcakes. I mean, obviously, if you could avoid even a little bit of penetration of your skull, that would be a good thing. And so this one, the TCMS therapy, be on the lookout for that. It's very, very interesting and very promising. I think it's going to help a lot of people. Now, yet another modality that has recently come on stream and I think will be making a difference for people is reported in November of 2021, episode of New Scientist, and it has to do with psilocybin and ketamine. So these were both highly controlled substances up until very recently. Well, they still are to some extent. Here's a picture of a young man being treated, during a psilocybin treatment. Now, this has to be done with supervision in a clinical setting so that everything is on the up and up. This is not just going out and tripping on your own on mushrooms or ketamine. But what's being discovered now is that ketamine can be administered to people in relatively small doses, spaced out, closer in the beginning and then longer and longer periods of time, and in combination with supervision and talk therapy and or psilocybin. And what's being discovered is that there's a whole segment of people struggling with chronic depression and anxiety who will be helped by that. People who failed on all the other drugs, people who failed on talk therapy, people who failed on ECT, that's electroconvulsive therapy, which actually works quite well for a certain segment of people. Well, how about that? So the government is loosening its grip a little bit on previously scary molecules. There's now being permission to do clinical studies more and more using these agents, and it's becoming clear that it can be very important. There's lots of people who, one psilocybin treatment, they're good for 6 months before they even start thinking about needing another one. The ketamine treatment, I saw that completely transform the life of one of my former students. He was a very nice young kid, super smart, worked for me in my research lab after having taken a course from me. And I was in close contact with him and knew what he was doing as he began to undergo some ketamine treatments in order to help him treat lifelong disabling and concentration destroying depression. And it was quite inspiring. I mean, it was wonderful. I watched this young guy just change. He just, his whole demeanor, his physicality, his ability to focus, his ability to relate to me and to other people just completely improved. And he came online as a much more viable human being after the first 3 treatments with ketamine. And it was a last resort kind of thing. He had to get special permission from his psychiatrist and apply to what was then a research program. I think this is now somewhat more commonplace as a clinical modality, and you can go places and sign up for that. So, wow, progress is happening. There are smart people on the case trying to move things along in order to address the difficult moment in humanity's sojourn here. And I think I'll close then with a last case analysis of this, and in some ways even the more exciting, just because it's the easiest to do. There's now a whole emerging field of health called Psychobiotics. And the whole point of this one is that there's rapid discoveries being made concerning the intimate connection between all the little bugs living in our intestines. Sometimes this is called the gut microbiome, and the rest of our body's health, and especially the stuff up here. Uh, Turns out that we have two very crucial structures in our body that involves closely knit together cells that comprise what we call tight junctions. And the first lining of tight junctions is called the gut lining, or the intestinal lining. And it's the one that lines all through your gut. It's a form of endothelial cells. Well, what we've discovered now is that the kinds of bacteria living in your gut has a huge effect on the health and integrity of these tight junctions in the gut cells. And if you've got the right bacteria in there, everything works correct, and these things stay tight, and food digestion particles and molecules stay on the right side of the lining. But if you have the wrong kinds of bugs, the wrong microbiome, there's a degradation in the lining, and you can end up with what's called a leaky gut. Now, the leaky gut can also be brought about by allergies. So, for example, it's far more understanding now about the number of people who are gluten sensitive, gluten intolerant. Well, in many people, wheat gluten irritates the gut and messes up these junctions, and so you end up with food allergens and toxins leaking through the intestinal lining into the blood, and that wreaks all kinds of havoc. Okay, the other crucial place in our body where we have a painstakingly evolved and very intricately designed set of these tight junction lining cells is in the vasculature in our brain. This is called the blood-brain barrier. So, started off talking about the intestinal lining, gut-blood barrier. Now I'm at another level, which is the blood-brain barrier. Cells lining. It's just a specialized lining, essentially, to the arterial network in the brain. The same molecules that can be a problem for the gut lining can be a problem for this blood-brain barrier. And it turns out if you have leaky gut going on, because maybe you've been eating either things you were allergic to and that you reacted against, or something has gone off the rails with your microbiome, that can also influence the integrity of your blood-brain barrier, and you can end up with the wrong molecules diffusing out of your blood into your brain cells. That causes big problems. And because I'm sort of getting near the end of my time here, I think I'm going to, well, I'll give you a real surface level notion of what they're calling this and how big of a deal the scientists involved think it is. There's discoveries being made every week about this. I've been learning about this mostly from my surveillance of science videos on YouTube, which is a little harder for me to show you here by this medium. But one of the main things they've discovered, for example, is that you can take mice, and if you raise mice in a microbe-free kind of fashion, this was originally sort of an accidental discovery. What they find was that if they raised germ-free mice that don't have any microbiome in their gut, those mice weren't doing too well. They had poor socialization skills. They were anxious. They were, by a number of measures, they seemed to be cognitively impaired. There was a real problem. And then what they discovered, though, was that if they introduced this one particular bacteria into their intestinal tract, a bacteria called Lactobacillus rhamnosus, that's spelled Lactobacillus, that's easy. Rhamnosus is Rhamnosus. Those mice normalized, and they suddenly stopped being anxious and overreactive to stimuli or afraid of other mice, or afraid to explore their cages, and they became much closer to normal, and therefore attained better overall health and longevity. Since then, that was done, I think, around 2016 or so. In 2017, there was a big test wherein they administered this same microbiome supplement to a cohort of pregnant women, and they were interested in studying the effects of gut microbiome on postpartum depression and anxiety, and they found a very favorable effect. It was real clear. The group of women who were supplemented with Lactobacillus rhamnosus came through the pregnancy and delivery process in a much generally mentally healthier, less anxious state. This has now been generalized. They're finding a number of very specific microbes that they identify in people, which seem to impart very obviously measurable degrees of psychological well-being to people. It's now become appreciated that something like 60%, maybe 70% of the serotonin made in your body comes from gut bacteria. The serotonin, you might have heard before, that's one of the many neurotransmitters that we have in our brain. It helps the neurons talk to each other, and there's a whole suite of neurotransmitters. I forgot the last count. I think it's like 28 and counting or something. But the serotonin is one of the biggies, and a lot of the psychiatric medications, the psych meds, operate on modulating serotonin levels. Well, it was only discovered, I don't know the year, not that long ago, that it's being synthesized by gut microbiota in large measure. So also are some of the dopamine precursors. And that's revelatory. This is knowledge that's just coming on stream. It hasn't even been fully utilized yet. This is still knowledge sort of looking for applications, looking for easy implementations. And we'll be hearing more and more about this. But the good news is that things are in the pipeline. We're going through a challenged time. Mental health issues are more important than they've ever been. And there's a lot of societal reasons for that we need to address and think about. And we don't want to just be going to electrodes in your head and thinking about your gut microbiota as the answer to it all, because there's other reasons why society is going nuts. It involves things like introspection and teams of sociologists helping us figure it out. But at least from the point of view of what we can do individually to try to protect our own mental health and that of our family and friends and loved ones by taking specific measures to remediate problems when they arise. Wow, the knowledge is exploding, and that's really pretty wonderful. And I hope this has been an interesting talk for you. It's good to have a sharing with you, my lodge buddies, and I wish you all a lovely 2022. Thanks. Bye-bye.